everybody. This is Todd Dewey from Ice Road Truckers on the History Channel, and I love to listen to TNC Radio.live.
Welcome in, TNC Radio.live. This is Building Strong Minds with Dr. Christopher Cortman. I'm Tom Kelly. We're going to be with you here for the next hour or so, talking about the social black belt. We've been talking about this the last couple of weeks, and Dr. Cortman, why don't you give us a kind of an overview as to where we are and tell us where we're going.
Yeah, thank you, and good evening to everyone. Where we are is we are being victimized by one of us being long-winded. I'm not going to say which one of us can't seem to get past the first truth. And the other guy's really trying with the show to move this along, but the psychologist guy just keeps on dragging us through the first truth. And I have a little bit more of the first truth tonight, and then I want to get into the second truth, mercifully, for those who have been waiting patiently. There are 10 truths, and the very first one, Tom, is you can understand your feelings. They are not strange visitors from another planet that dominate our lives. The great book that many of us have read along the way is M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled. And one of the things he wrote in that book that I really like is that you are the master and your emotions are the slaves, not the other way around. And too many of us are enslaved by our emotions because we don't know where they come from, we don't understand them, and we become really at their mercy. And so we're frightened, so we run. We have anxiety and we avoid. We have anger and we aggress. We feel sad, so we stop functioning. And if we really understood where our emotions come from, what they mean, and how to champion them, let's just say we could be that much more successful with our lives. And that's a big part of this program that we teach to the kids. So the very first truth is you can champion your emotions. And, the 4 parts we've been talking about so far. The first part is that our feelings or emotions, and I use those words interchangeably, they come never from events. They don't come from situations. They don't come from other people. They come from the way you perceive the world. What you tell yourself is much more important than what is really happening. So your perceptions create your feelings, not the actual events. Secondly, that your emotions are statements about you. Whatever you feel a lot of, that's because that's how you see the world. The way you feel about politics, the way you feel about religion, the way you feel about books and movies and sports and whatever, always statements about you. Thirdly, your emotions are always statements about your investments. You will never feel any type of emotion unless you're invested in something, unless you care about something. You and I have spoken about this at length related to sports. Sports that we care about, a lot of passion about. We feel strong feelings. Sports that we are disengaged from or know nothing about, they cannot create emotion in us no matter what happens because there is no investment. Same thing's true about the real estate market. Years ago, it just tanked. And I remember talking to people who were just devastated, and I talked to other people who didn't feel anything. And their answer was, I don't own anything. They don't have the horse in the race. There's no investment emotionally, financially. Therefore, you don't feel. And the fourth thing where we ended off last time, Tom, is that our emotions always tell a story. And my favorite description for this which I think is especially apropos for our truck driving audience, is the dashboard lights, the dummy lights on the dashboard that light up to convey a message about the operation of the machinery. And it's the same thing with our emotions. And if we could pick up there right now, we've spoken about anxiety at length. We've spoken about anger at length. I believe I mentioned something about sadness always being an indication of loss, the perception of loss. You know, I spoke to a woman today who was feeling a lot of sadness because she's putting her daughter in a vehicle and driving her up to college for the first time, and her nest is officially empty. And she says, I just keep crying, and I feel a little embarrassed. And it's like, no, this is commensurate with what's going on. You have fancied yourself as a mother for the past 22 years. You know, she dropped out of all work, and she was a stay-at-home mother, and her world revolved around this. And now she's graduating along with the kids. But now there's this sense of loss, and the loss, interestingly, runs deeper than I'm going to miss having my kids at home. That's also true. But the loss is, who am I now? This was my function. This is who I was. You know, retired guys, retired ladies feel a lot of that same thing. And like, I knew who I was when I was working, but now, who am I now? What am I doing now? What's the purpose of this now? So anyway, the sadness is always a message to the self about the perception of loss. And the greater the sadness, the greater the loss. You know, our emotions are always commensurate with the degree of investment. How much you care about something will be very, very instrumental in assessing just how strong your feelings are. So I want to go into another couple of emotions today, and then maybe we can move on to the second truth, if that works for you. And the two emotions I want to talk about, these are, I'm pretty much sticking with the ones that hurt, because I want to give people tools to, you know, to overcome the various painful emotions. So this one is guilt. A lot of people feel very strong emotions of guilt. And I want people to understand that guilt is not because we've done something wrong, but because we believe we have done something wrong. There are people in this world, Tom, who don't even know what guilt is other than they've read about it. You were mentioning before you grew up without the ability to perceive depth in your eyes. And someone says, what's that like? And you're like, I don't know. I never had it. Well, some people have never experienced guilt before. They don't know what it's like to feel guilty. And that's because there are people, a very small percentage, thank the Lord, who have no conscience. And they could very easily do something to destroy another person's world, destroy their lives, take a life if they have to, and they won't feel anything later. They have no guilt. These people are called sociopaths, and they lack the capacity to feel guilt. On the other end of the spectrum, as you might imagine, there are people who are guilt sponges. They're always feeling guilty about everything. You know, this is a part of the world where people come for vacation. And the guilt people are the ones who say, I'm so sorry you came here and it rained all week. I feel so awful. And that's when you want to say, it's okay, Mom, you don't control the weather, remember? But the guilt is always there. If something isn't working out perfectly, they feel guilty. And again, guilt doesn't come from doing something wrong. It comes from perceiving that you've done something wrong. So, you know, I thought of an example of, and it's a true example of a couple of guys fishing on a Sunday morning. And one guy is just enjoying the incredible beauty of nature and relaxing and just feeling like, boy, if this isn't the best thing in the world. And the other guy's feeling terribly guilty because it's Sunday. Why am I not in church? I don't have any good reason to not be in church. I need to be there every Sunday or I'm letting down. And then you could fill in the blank. God, my parents, my Sunday school teachers, whoever. But there's lots of guilt. Now, I want to say that the sun and the surf and the fish are not creating these emotions. Both guys are seated in the same boat, having essentially the same experience, catching the same number of fish. But one guy's in heaven and feeling very close to the Creator, and the other guy's in a self-induced hell, feeling far, far away from God. I hope that makes some sense, because it's again can be traced back to the way we perceive things, and not what's really happening. So I want people to always understand that again, guilt is a light that goes on the dashboard, and it requires action. All of these lights on the dashboard, these emotions, are a call to action. Just like the oil light or the gas light, they're a call to action. And so when the guilt light comes on, it's okay to ask yourself, why am I feeling so guilty? And address what that is. And again, if you did something and you think you hurt someone's feelings, be man enough, be strong enough to get a hold of that person and apologize for whatever it is you've done wrong. Sometimes you'll find out it's exactly right and they are hurt. And other times they'll say, what are you talking about? I wasn't distancing myself from you. I've just been busy. Stop apologizing. You didn't do anything wrong. And thank you for thinking about me. So, all of these emotions are calls to action. They're not designed to live the rest of your life feeling sad or guilt or angry or resentful or anxious or fearful. They're supposed to give you information so you can respond appropriately.
All right. Well, I tell you what, we're going to take a break, and I've got a question for you about that when we come back. So stay right there. We'll be right back here in just a couple of minutes. You're listening to TNC Radio.live. Stay tuned.
Mallard Buildings always gives back to the community. At the recent Night at the Gatsby Gala, which was presented by McNeese to benefit the McNeese Athletic Foundation, Lee Malek donated over $23,000. His generosity and continued support will serve the student athletes, coaches, and support staffs well into the future. Lee Mallet is dedicated to building a better McNeese and a better Louisiana.
Budgeting tips for over-the-road truck drivers. Budgeting can be rather overwhelming at first. It requires a plan and self-discipline. But there's no need to be scared. Once you get the hang of budgeting, it'll become easy and will no longer feel like you're restrained from your finances. It's a good feeling to know exactly how much you're spending and where your money's going. Start budgeting today, and you'll begin to save money and see a difference in your finances. Here are some great budgeting tips for over-the-road truck drivers. Know your why. The first step to creating a budget is understanding your why. What is your reasoning for creating a budget? What do you want to accomplish? Are you trying to pay off debt? Are you trying to save for a big purchase? Or are you just wanting to be more conscious of your spending? Knowing your why before creating a budget will help motivate you and keep you on track. Set goals. Setting goals will help you achieve your why. To pay off debt or to save a specific amount, you need to know how much you need to be saving and budgeting each month. It's much easier to save and budget when you have a specific goal. Saving just to save does not always keep you motivated. Know your income. Since drivers typically get paid by the mail, drivers have a fluctuating income. Unless you have a dedicated route, your paychecks will vary. Drivers with a set income have a much easier time creating their budget because they know the exact amount they're bringing in every month. If you have a fluctuating income, it's best to know your baseline, meaning you need to know the bare minimum expenses that you need to cover every month. Analyze your spending. Next, you'll need to analyze your spending habits. You can do that by looking at your bank account and examining where you're spending most of your money. Are you spending most of your money at truck stops, fast food restaurants? Another great way to evaluate your spending is to make a list in a notebook or your cell phone for every purchase you make throughout the month. Keeping track of your spending will not only give you an idea of how much you're spending each month, it will also make you more mindful of your spending. Needs versus wants. When budgeting, it's important to know the difference between needs versus wants. Things you need as a truck driver: food, place to sleep, clothing, toiletries. Things you may want: entertainment, TV, video games, computers, Netflix or Hulu subscription, accessories for your rig. As a budgeter, you need to pay attention to your needs first and save for the things you want. Set a limit. Setting a spending limit is the best way to keep yourself from overspending. Write down all your necessary living expenses and keep in mind how much you want to save each month. Then determine how much you want to spend. A good method to help you set a limit is the envelope system. Budgeting takes time and self-discipline. It's not easy at first, but over time, it will become easier and easier. I'm Shelley Johnson with Kathy Tuccaro. You can hear us Tuesdays on TNCRadio.live at 8 p.m. Eastern on Women Road Warriors. And don't miss Steve Summers' Overnight Drive right here on TNCRadio.live, weeknights midnight to 5 a.m. Eastern. Brought to you by Hot Shot Secret.
Hey, welcome back to TNCRadio.live. This is Building Strong Minds with Dr. Christopher Cortman. I'm Tom Kelly, talking about emotions and the warning lights. That I really like that. The dashboard, and you got the warning lights coming on. But look, okay, I'm going to confess, I'm the same guy as a lot of guys who are out there driving right now. And the truth of it is, sometimes those warning lights come on and you thump it a couple of times and you shrug and you say, you know what, I choose to ignore that. And so what are some of the dangers, obvious and not, of taking emotion? You know, I'm upset about something, I'm disappointed about something, I'm whatever, and just deciding I'm just not going to deal with it because I've got to drive the truck, I've got to work on the radio station, I've got to, do this, do that, I've got things to do, and so I'm just not going to deal with it.
Truly excellent question. And my answer is not going to surprise you, because it is always in proportion to what it is that you are ignoring. So let's stay with our analogy first. Many of us drove through the entire decade of the 1980s with the engine lights on in our car. And we didn't know what exactly was wrong. All we knew is that the car would keep on running. And we didn't have the money to take it in and hear some bad news. So the engine light would always be on. We meet a new girl and she'd say, what is that light on? It's like, don't worry about it. And, for some of us, we had serious engine problems down the road, and others, we ended up, driving the car until it died and it still had the engine light on. But if it were the fuel light that was on, we could only drive so far, maybe another 50 miles or so, and then the car would run out of gas. And that was the consequence of not paying attention. You've heard me on this very show before talking about the rear door being open on the driver's side, and I like knowing that, because if my son ever fell out, his mother would be very angry with me. So there's consequences for anything that are, I would say, proportionate, or they're commensurate with whatever you're ignoring. Now let's go away from the vehicle and let's talk about the emotions. What if you go through your life and you ignore your resentment or your anger light on? Well, you could find yourself drinking on a regular basis to try and put that light out. I know a lot of people who put themselves to sleep by abusing alcohol, drinking to excess, because they don't want to deal with what happened in combat, or they're incredibly resentful about what happened in their divorce, or the betrayal that they felt, or the fact that they were molested as children and never dealt with any of those things. So some people are just miserable throughout their lives, or they walk around extremely anxious and they're on very significant medication. Interestingly, the medication is designed to, I guess, sort of like take a hammer to the dummy light on the dashboard and smash the light and go, there you go, what light? I mean, medication is supposed to do that, so we're not troubled by our anxiety or by our strong feelings. And, as a psychologist, I'm going to say those feelings are there for a reason. Don't smash the light out, address them. Get to the bottom of where they're coming from. And why am I sad? I should get to the bottom of that. There's a loss somewhere. There's something I need to grieve. When people really understand this life, Tom, they understand that life is a series of losses. Actually, to borrow the lyrics from the great street philosopher Billy Joel, life is a series of hellos and goodbyes. I'm afraid it's time for goodbye again. Those people who do life well not only understand that they're going to lose thousands of people and things along the way, but they understand that they have to grieve those losses and, as much as possible, replace them. They literally have to replace those losses to the best of their ability if they're going to have any meaning in their lives. And so, you have the best dog in the world, but you have to bury that dog, and everybody cries and bury the ashes in the backyard. And then 4 months later, you got to bring home Sparky and love all over again, because life is this series of losses, and we don't stop after a loss and say, well, I'm never going to love again. I'm never going to love any animal like that again, because all I'm guaranteeing for myself is loneliness and sadness and emptiness, because I'm not going to ever fill that void. So we have research that says we know who's doing the best job aging in this world. And those are the people who learn how to grieve their many losses, but also replace them. I'm really sorry you can't play anymore. Now I'm going to ask you to coach, because people your age don't play tackle football, but we can sure use your wisdom and your experience and your guidance, and teach these other big boys the footwork on an offensive line. Just because you'll never block another defensive end doesn't mean you can't teach your craft to young people. And again, you're replacing your loss. So, we have these emotions, and we need to deal with them for what they are. I can remember a man who was molested as a boy, and he felt shame his entire life. And he finally told me about these ugly experiences, and he said how it has affected him as a man and as a husband. And I said, did you ever tell your wife? He said, no, she would leave me. She would be ashamed of me. I said, no, your wife's not going to do any of those things. She's going to be proud of you for trusting her, and she's going to have compassion for you, and she's going to draw closer to you if you tell her these things. And he said, I can't do that. I said, sure you can. You could do it here. He said, all right, but if she leaves me, I said, I'll take responsibility. Go call a lawyer now. But of course, when his wife came in, she cried because all these years he had kept that secret. And she just loved on him and said, I wish you would have told me a long time ago. I'm not ashamed of you. I'm sorry that you were hurt as a boy. And she drew close to him. I mean, these emotions are not things that go away on their own, and they're not things to run away from. They're things to face. The reason I'm still doing this after 80,000 hours is because people get better when they face what they're afraid of, when they face their emotions, when they deal with whatever happened to them, whether it was a terrible thing that happened by the guy down the street, or whether it was Vietnam, or being, cheated on or abandoned, or having an angry, abusive father, or a mother who died young, or whatever. We all have our stuff. We all have our stuff. Some of us were teased and bullied as kids. But when we face the stuff, I have stories of boys who finally came in for help when they were like 21, but they had already been in their room by themselves. Once they were bullied one too many times, and they stopped growing, they stopped developing, they stopped going to school. They just hid out because they felt awful. So when they came to me, I made them tell me everything. Tell me everything that haunts you. Share your stuff. And that's how they recovered. That's how they had a life. This one guy I'm thinking of left his room finally and moved to New York City by himself. And, after being completely dependent on his parents and seeing no one because he was ashamed from his years of being bullied, he was able to start his life again. What are the consequences of not dealing with the emotions, you ask, or the dummy lights? There's not one answer, but whatever we avoid, it costs us in some way. And if possible, especially if it's important, I really need to face whatever it is. Let me talk about one more emotion, unless you need to break.
That's a good stopping point. Let's stop there for a moment, take a quick break, come back, and jump into the next one. You're listening to TNC Radio.live. Stay right there.
Hi, I'm Dr. Christopher Cortman, and now for the Mental Health Minute. I promised you in part one of this video that we'd talk a little bit more about enabling versus helping. Let's pretend that you have a son, and this son has a wife and 2 kids, and he's working 2 full-time jobs, and sometimes has a 3rd gig whenever he can. And you say to the son, I'd like to help you get in your first house. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to match every dollar you can come up with, and together we'll put a down payment for you on a new house. Are you helping or enabling? Most people would say helping. He's doing everything he possibly can. But you also have a daughter. She's in her 5th semester of college. She's a freshman. And she's kind of taking her sweet time dropping classes. And she's only compiled about 12 credits thus far. And she says, Daddy, the lease is up. I need you to sign for me again for this wonderful plush apartment. Sounds like an opportunity to enable to me. Why? Because she's not doing everything she possibly can to help herself. That's probably where a parent has to step in and say, time to come home and let's go to community school or some kind of a change because I'm no longer willing to enable. In my book, Your Mind, an Owner's Manual for a Better Life, I wrote a little ditty on enabling, and it goes something like this. When you call him in sick, he's been drinking with Rick, that's enabling. When she's living for thrills, you've been paying her bills, that's enabling. I know what you're thinking, keep your day job, Cortman. But here's the thing. Help people as long as they're doing everything they can to help themselves. Otherwise, stay out of the way and let them do what they can to help themselves.
I'm Hope Savara. Join us on TNCRadio.live at 7 p.m. Eastern with Building Strong Minds with your host, Dr. Christopher Cortman.
welcome back. TNCRadio.live. This is Building Strong Minds with Dr. Christopher Cortman. So, Dr. Cortman, we were talking about, you were about to talk about another emotion?
Yeah, I want to talk to people about panic. And I have a take on panic that...
Wait a minute. Oh, sorry. I just wanted...
I think people will appreciate. Because, I still read things that colleagues of mine write or say to their clients, and I'm really dissatisfied and disagree vehemently with their perceptions. They say things like panic and panic attacks, which I guess I owe it to the listener to define, and I will in a minute. But they say that panic attacks are random, they're spontaneous, they occur without any kind of warning or reason. And boy, I just find that so inconsistent with what I have seen. And again, I like to refer to my experience as being significant because it is 80,000 hours and 36 years of full-time private practice. And, there's a lot to draw on. I don't have, one or two cases here or there. I've had many, many, many people suffer from panic attacks. And so when I say to you, there's a message from panic as well. There's a message from anxiety. There's a message from sadness. There's a message. Imagine if I said there's a message from every emotion there is, but not panic. That's just random. It just comes when it comes. And, good luck to you. So I'm not going to say that. Now, I promised you that I would define what is a panic attack. And I'm going to begin with, it's actually the same thing as an anxiety attack. A panic attack and an anxiety attack are the same thing. The second thing I want to say is that it's a complete misnomer. It doesn't attack anything. It's not like there's such a thing called a panic and it hides behind the bushes and you're walking down the road, minding your business, and you get assaulted by a panic. What panic is, it's an exaggerated stress response. And, you've probably, or if you've been listening to these shows, you've heard before that the stress response always begins with the perception of threat. It doesn't just happen. You have to actually perceive a threat. The classic is the flashing lights in your rearview mirror. Most of us have a degree of alarm reaction, the beginning of stress, the stress response when that happens, because there's a threat built in. A police officer is pulling me over. And if we pull over and the officer keeps going, within seconds, our body returns to homeostasis.
That was close.
Right? What a relief. Okay, so back to the panic. What is it? So our heart starts racing and the blood is pumping. The heart is pumping the blood to the major muscle groups. And the major muscle groups, for those of you who are wondering, are your chest, back, arms, legs, the things that you need to fight and to run. It's the fight or flight response that our bodies have. And we're being prepared hormonally. There are secretions of the stress hormone, cortisol, norepinephrine. It allows us to do greater things than we would normally do. It's built for emergencies, though. We're not supposed to keep the stress button on. Okay, we've talked about that before in some of these shows. But panic is just an escalation of that. And our respiration becomes very shallow and very rapid. It's difficult to breathe. And with a panic attack, our chest constricts, and it feels to some people like there's an elephant sitting on their chest. And there's these tingling sensations in the arms and legs. They call it paresthesia. And you feel warmth from the blood that comes to the surface of the skin, and you perspire from the heat of the blood. So you get the sweaty palms. And I remember a young lady in the early part of my career, every time I was around, she got sweaty palms. It was like, what is that about? And it's actually the stress response, because she had a crush on me. And so I would walk into that office and say, let me feel your hands. And she'd say, no. I said, just let me touch your hand. You know, it was a joke, but it was the stress response. The heat from the blood causes the perspiration. So that's why you have the sweaty palms and so forth. So the body's preparing you to fight or to run. But with panic attacks, people assume the worst. They assume that I'm dying, or I'm going crazy, or I'm losing my mind, or I'm having a heart attack. Every one of those thoughts are catastrophic thoughts. And they all lead to a greater surge of adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol. Why? Because I'm literally pouring gasoline on a fire when I have thoughts like, oh my God, I'm dying. And these things can get so bad for a person that they will literally call 911, or they'll drive to the emergency room. Emergency room doctors see people with panic attacks routinely because these people think they're having a heart attack and dying. And they'll do all these different tests, EKG and so forth. And they'll say to people, look, your heart is fine. You just had an anxiety attack, or you just had a panic attack. And then they'll say you need to relax more, or you're stressed about something. And maybe they'll give them a prescription for an antidepressant or a tranquilizer or something. But really what they need is to understand why they just had a panic response. And this is what I'm saying with the dummy light that goes on in the dashboard. The message from panic, are you ready for this? The message from panic is that you perceive that you are trapped or overwhelmed. Almost 100% of the time when people have these panic attacks, they're not only not random, they're not spontaneous. It's when the mind draws a conclusion that I can't get out of here. I'm stuck. I'm trapped. I can't do this. I'm overwhelmed. This is horrible. Some kind of catastrophic thought will trigger a panic attack or anxiety attack. Let me give you some examples just so I can not prove the point, but illustrate the point. A physician never had a panic attack in his life. He's on vacation with his family, and he's scuba diving, and he's loving it underwater. And they go into a cave, an underwater cave, coolest thing he'd ever seen. And then at one point, he can't find his way out of the underwater cave. Guess what happens? His very first panic attack. His very first panic. Random? I don't think so. It came at the moment when he said, I don't know where the hell is out. I don't know how to get out of here. Another example. A gentleman in his 70s, also no history of panic. He's going through some testing, some chest x-rays, and they have a machine, and they lower the machine onto his chest, and they leave the room. And he's like, oh, I can't breathe. This is heavy. And nobody hears anything. And guess what happens? He has his very first panic attack. A woman, I loved working with this woman, by the way. She's in a movie theater, and she's sitting by herself, so she has space. And then somebody sits to her right, and somebody sits to her left. And she's like, uh-oh, I'm trapped. And guess what happens? She has a panic, and she's about to leave. And when and she slaps down on the movie seat and says, with her best cuss words, something like, "Damn it, I paid like $8 for these tickets. I'm not going anywhere. You come and get me." And guess what? It stopped right there, and she watched the entire movie. I gave a talk once in a church on anxiety. One of my patients had anxiety and had panic attacks. And she said, I went there early, so I didn't have to deal with a lot of people. And I sat right in the middle, right there was your podium, and I was right there. I could see you. And I thought, this is great. Hardly anyone's here. And then as it became closer to the time you were speaking, people kept filing in, and the whole room was full until finally one guy sat under the piano. And then she said to herself, I can't do this. I'm trapped. And I can't even get out if I had to go to the bathroom because I'd have to walk past all these people. And then she said the most curious thing happened. She said, you started speaking, and I took my mind off where I was sitting and I listened to you, and I was totally fine. And within minutes, I didn't even realize what happened. The panic came from the perception of entrapment, and it went away as soon as she changed her focus to whatever it was I was saying. All she had to do was put her mind on what I was saying, and she stopped panicking, because the panic comes from the mindset, and the mindset is usually I'm trapped or overwhelmed. Is it break time, or should I keep going?
It is break time. Tell you what, let's take one more break, come back, and we'll wrap things up. You're listening to TNCRadio.live. Stay right there.
5 common health hazards truck drivers face. A healthy lifestyle is often overlooked by most truckers. Due to work conditions in the trucking industry, it's difficult for truckers to live a healthy lifestyle. Living on the road makes it hard for truckers to prioritize their health. Truck drivers have limited access to healthy food, lack of sleep, and exercise. Due to their work and living conditions, truck drivers statistically have more health problems. It's important for truck drivers to be aware of the common health hazards they face. To live a long, healthy life, truckers will have to focus on their health and make a conscious effort to be healthy. Sleep apnea. Sleep is crucial for truck drivers. Lack of sleep can make driving dangerous. A study shows that long-haul truck drivers obtain less sleep than the required amount for alertness on the job. Truckers need a good night's sleep to be fully alert and ready to take on the road the next morning. Getting a good night's sleep is crucial for keeping a truck driver alert and productive. Truck drivers travel several hundred miles each day. To reach their destination on time, they'll have to prioritize sleep so they can be alert and ready. Obesity. When you live in a tiny truck cab and drive for 11 hours a day, it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain a healthy lifestyle. As a result, obesity is a terrible problem that American truck drivers face. According to the American Dietetic Association, 86% of truck drivers are obese. Healthy food is hard to come by while driving and working on the road. Truck stops offer greasy, high-calorie food rather than healthy fruits and vegetables. It's important for truck drivers to be conscious of what they eat. There are many other health risks that come with fast food and truck stop food. High blood pressure, also known as hypertension, is a silent killer of both your health and trucking career. A poor diet, smoking, obesity, lack of exercise are causes of high blood pressure. Truckers need to be aware of the causes of high blood pressure and take necessary steps to avoid them. Not only does high blood pressure put your life at risk, it can also disqualify you from driving. Truckers with stage 3 hypertension, that's 180 over 110, are automatically disqualified. Depression. Truck drivers spend a significant amount of time away from home and their loved ones. They also work alone for 11 hours a day. It's not uncommon for truckers to start to develop symptoms of depression. Truck driving's not an easy job. It comes with a lot of stress and anxiety. Depression not only affects a person mentally, it also affects you physically. Depression affects your energy levels and the amount of sleep you get. It can also cause a change in appetite, headaches, and muscle aches. It's important for truck drivers to consider their mental health as well as their physical health. This blog on TNCRadio.live is brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. You're listening to TNCRadio.live. Remember to tune in to the Truckers Network radio show with Shelley Johnson weekdays at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern.
Welcome back in TNC Radio.live, Building Strong Minds with Dr. Christopher Cortman. So, Dr. Cortman, you were talking about the panic attack stuff in the last segment. I got to admit, when you start going through the symptoms and all that, I can start feeling some of that. It was like, yeah, I know what he's talking about. I know what he's talking. You start getting that blood rush to your feet. You have the warm sensation. I mean, yeah, I can feel it.
Well, thank you for saying that, Tom, because, one of the things I would want people to know is that it's just an exaggeration of a very normal process, right? The stress response. However, the other thing that creates panic attacks, and I didn't say this before, so thanks again for resurrecting this issue with your question. The one other thing that can create panic attacks is the fear of having one. And I tell my patients, let's see if you could create cancer by being afraid of it. Bet you can't. Let's see if you could contract AIDS or COVID. You can't even catch a cold because you're afraid of having one. But with panic, it is the one thing I'm aware of that you could close your eyes right now and create a real panic attack just by thinking about it and being afraid of it and remembering one. You can trigger a panic attack like that. And once again, notice how it's not an attack. I created it myself by being afraid of it. And with some people, just that beginning sensation, they'll say, oh God, not this again. And then it's like they poured kerosene on the fire and there it goes. Not this again. And then there's like, oh no. And the more they think these catastrophic thoughts, the worse it gets, and the worse it gets, the more they think those thoughts. And yeah, we have what's called a vicious circle. And so with panic attacks, people need to learn some skills. And they need, one of the best skills we don't teach children is that if you want to turn anxiety into relaxation, inhale to the count of 3 and exhale to the count of 5, and just keep doing that for several minutes. And you can turn from an anxious mess into like Jello. You're just so relaxed because you're breathing like that. There are many skills, and we're going to talk about that as we gradually shift into the second truth. But one of the things I would want my panic people to know is the more you're afraid of panic, the more you bring it on. The more you're afraid of this, the more you create it. And the more you create it, the more you're afraid of it.
Yeah. It becomes a vicious cycle.
Absolutely. And so I tell a story about, and this is a true story, and there's no bragging in this story because I met this guy after he already did this, and he did it by himself. But I was treating his son, and his son started to have some panicky things, and he said, I just remembered when I was in my 30s, I got these panic attacks, and they were so bad that I stopped going to work. And then one day I said to myself, this is absolutely crazy. I can't afford to do this anymore. So I said to myself, that's it. I'm going back to work. You coming? Come with me. Have at me. Let's go, panic. And he kind of called them out. And then he said, you know what happened? I never had another one again. This guy's life was riddled by these things until he finally said, that's it. I'm done. Come if you're going to come, but I'm getting back to my life. Sorry, I'm moving on. And he never had one again. One of the things I'm saying here is that these things are created by the perception of entrapment, overwhelmed. Oh my God, I'm having one. Oh, I hope I don't have one. But they can be shut down. And one of the best ways to shut them down is to lose your fear of them. when people say this is not dangerous, and they're not fatal, you're not going to die of this. When you say, oh, this is, it's just an exaggeration of stress response. Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but so is your menstrual cycle. So is sneezing. So is, a headache. There's all kinds of things we go through, a kidney stone. There are a lot of things we go through that are uncomfortable, but we are not afraid of them because we understand what they are and what they're not. And we don't freak out anymore when I know what this is. This is a headache, or this is sunburn and it hurts, but I'm not off to the ER because I know what the natural course is. I'm going to throw some aloe on it and try to learn from my stupidity. So with panic, the worst thing we could do is start building our world around it. And when we do that, when we build a world around it, what happens is people start avoiding going to places where they had a panic attack. And soon enough, they stop going to shopping centers, and they stop going to movies, and they stop going to restaurants. And then they stop driving. Any place where they might have had a panic attack, they associate with the panic, and they stop going to those places. And then before long, they're only safe in their own house or in their own room. And they have actually developed a condition we call agoraphobia, which in the original Greek means a fear of the marketplace. But it's not a fear of the marketplace. It's a fear of panic attacks. And it's a fear of going any place where I might have one of these things. And I guess I want to share with you that there's even hope for that. But the hope is about facing these fears and learning skills to overcome the panic attacks. Because the people who do those things are finally capable of challenging whatever it is they're afraid of, and learning the skills so that, panic does not dominate their lives. So I promised you that we would do our very best to get on to the second truth. And of course, we're near the very, very, very end of the show, but at least I want to introduce the second truth, because we're going to, spend next week there, and Lord knows how many weeks after that. But the second truth, Tom, is about compulsive behaviors. And a compulsive behavior is anything that you feel a need to keep doing, and it just sort of dominates you because you're doing it too much. And we're going to get into next time all different kinds of compulsive behaviors, where they come from and how they're self-sustained, and 5 characteristics of them. And then I promise you, at the end of chapter 2, there are 3 ways that we can change how we feel. And I want to get into those things because, in all of this first truth, I've been talking about feelings, I've been talking about emotions and how we create them and where they come from. And I want to give people a sense of what we could do about that and how we could arrest our compulsive behaviors. And, whether that's drinking, or whether it's drugging, or whether it's gambling, or whether it's a porn addiction, or even some of the things that we think are healthy in nature, like work or exercise or eating. You could do any of those things compulsively. You could check your cell phone compulsively. You could play video games compulsively. And, and over the next week or so, I want to talk about where these things come from, and help people understand them as much as possible. And then most importantly, what we could do about it, 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 what we could